Greetings, fellow tarot travelers, tripping through the tetrahedral triptych of cards I shall lay before you. I'm Tarot Torch. And so now we're going to turn our attention to the very ancient country of Iran. Now, Iran's been around for a very, very long time. In ancient history, Iran is considered to be one of the world's oldest contiguous major civilizations, with historical and urban settlements dating back to 7,000 BC. Now, of course, these ancient civilizations are not the current civilization. If we come more to recent history, we find out that from 1941 to 1979, there was an absolute monarchy under the Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. And then after that, the Iranian Revolution, known as the Islamic Revolution under Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, took over the country. Iran is currently celebrating its 40th year anniversary of Islamic Revolution. And during those 40 years, unfortunately, the human rights record is not that great. Reporters Without Borders has received information that it has verified concerning 62,000 people. That's 62,000 people who've been detained, flogged, tortured, and executed between only 1979 and 2009. 850 journalists were also imprisoned and treated similarly. According to Amnesty International, over 7,000 people were imprisoned last year for holding controversial views, half of whom who dared to protest against the government. Now, in terms of international relations, on May 8th, Donald Trump revoked the nuclear arms treaty that was passed under Barack Obama, which, by the way, was never ratified by Congress and thus was not a ratified treaty and did not enter into law. In fact, signed treaties in America actually don't just enter into law, they enter into the Constitution, believe it or not. Now, Trump ended all inspections of nuclear facilities in Iran that could produce weapon-grade uranium. Also were plans to sell $20 billion worth of aircraft to Iran. And Iran, for a while now, has considered leaving the agreement as well. You see, it's a two-sided coin. Just because America departs from the agreement doesn't mean Iran has to. In fact, it's a multinational agreement involving America, England, China, France, many countries that came to draw up this agreement and signed on it. And now, just as of today, and I'm talking to you on May 8th, Iran did decide to roll back some of its agreements. Iran threatened to roll back parts of the nuclear agreement and return to enriching uranium and selling enriched uranium and running nuclear reactors that were put offline during the agreement time, and has given Western Europe and the world 60 days of an ultimatum. That's 60 days. So that puts us, I'm in May, so June, that'll be July of 2019. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is the official name of the agreement, of the international accord, is being slowly taken apart. And the reason is that the U.S., as I said earlier, is pulling out of the nuclear deal under Trump. And so now Iran is going to pull out part way. It will not pull out completely, but only in accord with the pull-out clauses of the agreement, so that Iran contends it is still in compliance. Well, what led up to all of this? It couldn't just be America pulling out of the agreement. And of course, it comes down to the sanctions. The U.S. has declared a zero tolerance for anyone buying Iranian oil, or they will face sanctions. And this is a worldwide embargo that started in 2018, but exceptions were given to various countries that are extremely dependent on Iranian oil, and that would be China, India, South Korea, Japan, and Turkey. And these countries were able to get their supplies and their reserves high enough that then the United States could apply these sanctions and not permit any more waivers. Iran has lost already $10 billion in revenue in the past 11 months. And the sanctions are in response for threatening allies and oil interests in the Middle East, according to America, and having, quote unquote, maligned ways. Well, that's a very vague term, and it's an unfriendly term. All of this is in the wake, of course, of the leaving the nuclear deal. And Venezuela and Libya are currently not in full production due to political instability, but there are hopes that this will push those two countries forward and demand from them some kind of stability with Haftar in Libya and, well, America's hopeful Guaido in Venezuela. And that may or may not work. Both countries are facing forced coups as we speak on behalf of oil interests in America. OPEC, however, is planning to cut production, but they have a meeting in June, so we'll see how that goes. And in the meanwhile, the Iranian rial has plummeted, and inflation is settling in, and they are in a recession. And China, who's the biggest oil importer from Iran, through this situation with sanctions and threatening to pull out of the agreement, the international agreement for nuclear, the comprehensive plan of action for the joint comprehension plan of action for the nuclear deal under Obama, China is going to go into a trade deal with the U.S., a bilateral trade deal. And so their supplies are high with oil now, but America is going to go into this trade discussion holding the oil card. Because if China starts to then deal with Iran, America can then put sanctions on China. Now, Russia, by contrast, will prosper from the higher fuel prices. And this crisis could justify an invasion of Venezuela by the United States. So we can see why America is doing it. And it will also subordinate Turkey, who did not receive John Bolton, and Turkey's been creating an alliance in the Middle East and elsewhere that the United States doesn't approve of. Turkey's been, expressing its own desire for an international domain like America and Russia express. So this is causing a lot of current conflict that's brewing, so to speak. Iran, in the meanwhile, has labeled all American troops in the Middle East as terrorists in response to American claims that the IRGC, which is the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, are terrorists. When America said the IRGC are terrorists, that's like saying the Marines or the Navy's terrorists. It's the majority of their military. And so, of course, Iran is going to now say all of American presence in the Middle East is terrorist. And both sides have arguments that sound reasonable to convince other countries. Iran claims that the IRGC has been attacking terrorist groups like ISIS and is not terrorist. Iran has Hezbollah in Syria and Lebanon posing a threat to Israel, and that may be at the heart of much of this. Iran claims they are legally there as invited guests by elected government, whereas U.S. troops in the same region, which far outnumber Iranian troops, are uninvited and, according to Iran, terroristic. Iran claims that Saudi Arabia, Israel, and America spread ISIS ideology. They destroyed Iraq, Libya, and Syria, and have an illegal troop presence while initiating illegal sanctions. Israel, at the same time, is bombing many Hezbollah sites, claiming they are retrofitting rockets for missiles for Palestinian resistance. The recent spate of 650 missiles fired into Israel are blamed on Iran. Well, Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, claimed the U.S. sanctions are economic terrorism. And Iran states that it will continue to sell its oil, even though America has stated anyone buying such oil will suffer sanctions. Now, typically, Iran sells oil during sanction times on the high seas in international water for a discount price. But so the U.S., in response, in preparation for that, and to protect the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran has threatened, has deployed a U.S. naval deployment. And this is not a small deployment, folks. This is a battle group with an aircraft carrier and B-52 bombers that can drop a nuclear payload. Iran claims to have a PhD in circumventing sanctions. So, where there's a will, there's a way. I'm sure they can get some of their oil sold. But America waited and waited until its allies had plenty of oil, and oil surged 3% to a nearly 6-month high as soon as these sanctions kicked in. And the sanctions are there to crush the Iranian economy. There's no question about it. Iran's oil exports are $50 billion a year, and America's just going to basically say worldwide, you don't get those $50 billion a year. So, economic sanctions are an act of war. This is basically an act of war from the United States. And in many ways, it's unprovoked. Iran had been obeying, in obeyance of the Obama deal, whether you like it or not. They were in obeyance of international law. And now there's this tit-for-tat fighting going on, and it seems that America is the aggressor in this case. Now, that may not be, an unfounded concern. Certainly, Iran has had rhetoric in its press and from its political and military leaders that's frightening. And they are a constant threat to Israel, an ally of America. So, there's more here than meets the eye, like the China trade deal. Now, Iran thinks it will make it through these sanctions because it sustains a large supply of gold, and it can use that gold to offset the sanctions. And Iran has a diverse economy with a strong agricultural sector, so it doesn't need oil to function. It'll just cause financial suffering for the citizens and for amenities and things like medicine, things that need to be imported. So, I mentioned earlier the U.S. deploying an aircraft carrier battle group called the Abraham Lincoln. And it's, they say it's 4 ships and bombers, but I've seen videos. It's more than 4 ships. The Abraham Lincoln has been deployed in this region on April 1st, but it was supposed to go to Croatia for repairs on May 8th. And America circumvented those repairs and just sent it back to the Strait of Hormuz. We don't know if that ship is in desperate need of repairs or not. So the possible goals for America is, with all of this rhetoric and sanctions and pulling out of agreements, is they may want war with Iran and regime change. America may want stabilization of Libya's economy with higher oil prices. America will possibly get a better trade deal with China and control over China by holding the reins and being able to squeeze open and shut the oil supply to China. And America could be, it's basically could be spitting at Russia, because Iran is the #1 trade partner of Russia. And Iran, with these loss of money, it's $50 billion a year, certainly isn't going to be importing a lot of Russian supplies. So we have all this going on in the world today, and our discussion is about Iran. So I have once again pulled out the Tarot of Marrakesh. Now, this is an Italian deck, and it's an Italian deck that has French subtitles, and it's pictographs of the Arabic Muslim lifestyle. And you have to understand that Arabic culture, Muslim culture, does not permit the artistic representation of human figures. I don't know how they watch TV and justify that, but they're not allowed to have human figures in their art. I guess, it's okay on TV, but not okay in a tarot deck or in a painting. So the only tarot decks available for the Middle East are made by Europeans, and hence the people tend to look a little bit Anglo. But it is a very charming deck, and it really does sort of bring forward the whole Arabic Muslim culture. Now, I know Persia's not Arabic, but it is Muslim, and these cards have a Muslim sort of, aspect to them. And so it's just a card I'm going to be using for this reading. There are no 7,000-year-old decks of tarot that I can use, so we're kind of limited here. And I just want to choose something that's thematically similar to the Shiite culture of Iran, not to discount the Zoroastrians or the Chaldeans or the other cultures, but the dominant culture is Islamic. I think everybody agrees to that. So I shuffled the cards before this reading, and here they are shuffled again. And we'll put the cards over to the side, asking our question, what's going on with Iran and the world? And are we going to end up with a world war? Various factions of Hezbollah have said we will be in a world war by July. They've given us a date. So let's see what the cards have to say. And the first card is the Fool. And it's called Le Mejnoun, or the Majnun. Now I want you to know that Majnun is an Arabic word that means the crazy one. Not the fool, but the insane one. But it is foolishness in its own right. So this is going to be the first card, which oftentimes represents the past. We're not locked into that. It's just a level of analysis. And certainly, we can say Iran and the entire world community has behaved foolishly. I don't think anyone will question that. War and the prospects of war is a foolish enterprise. The present, we have the de mandala, the two of mandalas. And you can see it's written at the bottom, the two of mandalas, even though it looks like only one is being shown. It's not an ace, this is the two. And the two of mandalas speaks of two worlds, two agreements, two treaties, two ideologies, two religions, two cultures. And then we pull out the third card, and it is the King of Mandalas. So we have two mandala cards, and we are going from a higher arcana down to a very lower arcana, one of the lowest ones available. And then we go to a court card of this same lower arcana. So this would mean that from the past to the present, things have gone really downhill, really bad, right in the wrong direction. But in the future, things may get a little better. Now remember, this reading is for Iran. Okay, so the future may be better. Now, so what we have here in the interpretations of this is that in the past, you know, with the imposed Shah of Iran was put there by British oil interests. Everybody knows that. And that was foolish. You know, imperialism and colonialism, it doesn't really work. If you look at all the countries that have gone through it, eventually they rebel, eventually they overthrow the yoke of oppression, and then they garner hatred and they want retribution, and it just doesn't work. And likewise, the Iranians to have a revolutionary Muslim government has been extremely foolish. They drove the Zoroastrians, the Chaldeans, and many other cultures of Iran into poverty or into forced migration. Their lands were stolen, highly taxed, and they destroyed their own culture. And they also became an international pariah in accordance with Western values. And so, you know, I think that there's been a lot of foolishness in how Iran's being handled, both by foreign interests and by the Iranians themselves. You know, we're talking about an ancient culture that has brought so much math and science and literature and alphabet and so much philosophy and art and knowledge to the rest of the world. This is one of the richest cultures on earth. And to see it limited into a singular extremist Muslim ideology, it's crazy. It's le majnoun. It's insanity. And for the world or America or England to think they can impose a Shah on it that's going to work is insanity too. These are intelligent people. These are cultured, international, multilingual people. And they've been degraded through their current government and educational system into a monocultural, mono-religious, monolinguistic nation. But their heritage is not that way. And currently, we've descended from the higher arcana all the way to the bottom of the lower arcana. And it's the two of mandalas. So we are right now, when you have two mandalas in political terrology, you know, that's two sides. You know, it's Israel and Iran, or it's America and Iran, or it's, the East and the West. It's the Axis and the Allies. It's Iran and Russia and its allies versus America, Israel, and its allies. It's the two encampments. We're not dealing with two religious cultures in Iran. We're not dealing with two people in Iran or two businesses in Iran. We're dealing with the allies versus the Axis nations. And I've listened to the rhetoric of both sides, and Iran's logic is very strong as to why they are doing what they're doing. And if Iran pulls Germany or other countries, France, even the entire EU, into its camp and ends up opposing American domination in the region, I mean, this world war could just be a sinking pool, which is exactly what the king of mandalas can be. The king of mandalas, because he's a king and he's mandalas, is going to go from the bottom where we are now, the worst possible situation, an oil embargo. Look, there's black circle. Is that the oil or what? And it's embargoed. There's the square outside it. So the oil embargo of America versus Iran, the two of mandalas. And there's going to be a king of mandalas that rises out of this. Some great leader. Now, it could be Iranian. It could be a Spaniard through the UN, or it could be someone from England or America. But someone's going to rise out of this and is going to be the new leader of Iran. Now, this could be regime change like they're trying to do with Guaido in Venezuela, or as they did with the Shah prior to the Islamic Revolution. It could be someone that comes from Iran. Maybe Iran defeats Israel and becomes the next caliphate. But all I can tell you is that someone's going to rise to power. But the thing about the mandalas, this is the thing everybody has to realize, and this includes the two of mandalas as well. A mandala is a circle, but that circle has intricacy of art on the inside. Much like the chair, or in this case, what the king is holding in his hand, there's a complexity of art in the center of that circle. And what that means is that it's a labyrinth. And so, as a labyrinth, it's the sinking hole. It's a sinking pit. It's a black hole. You can endlessly pour money into a war in Iran. We could have an American, Israel, British versus Russia, Iran, and some other countries, maybe Pakistan or a few other countries. And there could be a war with, France playing this side, then France playing that side, and Germany being on this side, Germany going to that side, the EU being on this side, the EU being on that side. And this war could go on 150 years. And it could just be this endless sinking pool where one side's winning, then the other side's winning. They use these new kind of arms, they use those new kind of arms. And, it could be a regional war. That is Iran, Iraq, Syria, and the whole place could just blow up and be a huge battlefield. And out of this enormous no man's land of endless warfare could rise some kind of Muslim leader who becomes some kind of biblical caliph of some apocalyptic war, of some end times tragedy that is being scripted from theological seminaries in England and America, where really they have no business trying to rewrite the Bible and force people into submission in order to enact their own view of what they think should occur. But they could force their hands, and we could see this kind of thing happen. So I'm not interested so much in the past. I rarely am. I think the foolishness of the past is there. We all know it. And we all know about the coming conflict or the present conflict. We know which sides are drawn. We know very clearly which sides are drawn. So the question is this king. Let's find out about him. I'm going to put another card or two out. Below we have the Neuf de Cimetière, the 9 of scimitars. And that's the 9 of swords. And above we have the Valet de Feu, the Page of Fire. And fire is the wand's suit for this deck. So we have the 9 of Swords and the Page of Wands covering the King of Mandalas, or known as the King of Coins, or the King of Pentacles in other decks. So, as a clarifier, what this means is that the King of Mandalas, we're talking about someone who has to be extremely courageous to lead the sinking pool of Iran. This is not going to be someone who's afraid to behead 1,000 people. If we go into a world war that lasts 150 years, expect the human lives lost to be at least, 5 million people, minimally. And that's because the war is going to spread. It could spread even into Europe and into Africa. So whomever rises to power is not going to be a lighthearted person. This is a very brave and courageous person, even if it's imposed on by the West. It's going to have to be a very brave individual. And the Page of Fire, now this is really, really interesting. It's the Page of Wands, okay? And so this person will talk a good line with Islam because, ideology as such, wands are like scrolls. They are the philosophical nature of the mind. And so this person will talk a good line about Islam and Christianity and Judaism and will bring everybody together. But this is the Page of Fire. And we're talking about Iran in this layout. So I don't know how to tell you this, but in Islamic culture, they don't have devils and demons like the Christians do. What they have is something called the jinn. And the jinn are born of fire. They don't have souls. They have fire instead of souls. And they are born to destroy humanity. They are the enemy of humans. And they do not take prisoners. They are here to kill and destroy as many humans as they can. And, people possessed of jinns show enormous strength and power, very much like an Exorcist movie. And it's very much like the classical Christian idea of a demon, although the difference is that the jinn, you can't convert them and you can't really control them. They are from a different kingdom. They are a life form, and an invisible life form that's different than the humans. They aren't fallen angels from heaven. The jinn have no redemption. They are simply the jinn. And this card speaks of, it's only a page. So we're talking about an empowered jinn, but not a disciplined jinn. So this could be a kingship or a caliphate or some kind of rulership that is coming in the future to Iran, where some great leader of peace who reestablishes a new kind of Islamic Iranian order and who's a very brave individual is in fact going to be the one who turns the 5 million deaths into 100 million deaths. This is the nature of this kind of card when we have a 9 of swords, which, by the way, the swords, as you can see, these are all swords. It's a very militaristic suit. We have wands and swords, the two militaristic suits. There's no cups here, and there are 2 discs, which is money. So there's money, militarism, and defense, offense, defense. And what I'm missing here are cups, which creates compassion and feeling. And so, this is a configuration of people who will make decisions behind closed doors about dollars, cents, human lives, political boundaries, pipelines, and if millions die, who cares? Because there's no compassion present at all in this reading. There is insanity of the past. There are 2 distinct sides and the lines are drawn. And there's the King of America, which is Trump. There's the King of the EU, which could be, at any time, any given person who's leading the EU and its decision-making policies. There's the King of Iran, which is the Ayatollah currently, but it could end up being someone else imposed or brought forward from the people should, a huge holocaust of war hits the Islamic world. And, this is a sinking pool. That's what the King of Mandalas is. The Queen of Mandalas is a visible sinking pool. You are in a labyrinth and you know it. The King of Mandalas, you think you're not in a sinking pool. You think you're not in a labyrinth. You are, but you think you're not. The king of mandalas will fool people and make them think that they are living in a peaceful, good world, protected, and all is well. Even the valet de feu, the noble page of fire, will make people think that all is well. And bravery and courage, even in the face of death. You know, these are things that are chivalrous and noble and committal and regal and lend to the king of mandalas as having a very powerful place. But to be honest, folks, this is very much a configuration of grab the oil, grab the money, and war on the people, and a lot of casualties and a lot of death. I'm not seeing a death card here. We'll tell you what, let's look at a card here real quickly for the middle, and then I'll bring the whole reading together. And this will effectively end my discourse on YouTube. If you'd like to see the rest of this video, it will be available on Patreon, and the cost is only $1. So if you want to hear the rest of it, come to Patreon and have a look. Well, welcome Patreon people for the conclusion of this reading. And the card I'm going to turn for the middle is the Knight of Mandalas. Another mandala card. It's all about money, folks. Oil and money. Boy, you could see the oil right there and the embargo around the oil. And you can see that this is the Knight. This is the power of the embargo right there. And the power to fight the embargo. And we have our first cups. Thank goodness. There's some cups, there's some compassion, there's some feeling present. This is the Cinq de Terrier, the five of urns. Urns are the cups in this deck. And so what describes the two is going to be a five. Now fives are usually destabilizing, but the Five of Cups represents, in classic Marseille Tarot, you have a suitor or you have a matchmaker who is looking at a suitor for a marriage. And here is the Knight of Mandalas, the Knight of Coins, Knight of Pentacles, who is, part of the Pentacle and the Pentacles. And this would be the suitor. The Knight is a military person, but it is someone who's there to protect the pipeline, to protect the economy, to protect the money. Don't kid yourself. What he's holding in his hands may not be a coin. It could just as easily be a grenade, or it could be an IED. It could also be a nuclear bomb or device, or even biological. What he's holding in his hands can be a tool of death. It doesn't have to be investment, money, and resources. So, but we have here the Five of Urns, and once again, the cups can also be biologicals because, you deal with test tubes and these things are frequently in glass containers and there could be five of them. We know that Rumsfeld did sell Saddam Hussein biologicals that never were found. And some of them could have gone to Iran, or they could have used them in another country and then brought them to Iran. And Iran has since then somehow strengthened them and worked on them. But what we have here in the present tense are warfare talk about money and sanctions, urgent meetings about the sanctions and the treaty, and we have a presentation of someone who might end up being the king, who might be the big peacemaker, and who is courageous, but beware, he's actually a jinn in disguise, out to destroy humanity. I hate to say it, folks, it might be crazy, but this is the kind of configuration that could lead to the rise of some kind of Islamic Antichrist or something of the sort. It's not out of the question. So let's remove these cards for a moment, and don't forget this one. How critical that is next to the king, as you can see. It shows that there's an entire court evolving around money, That money's the key indicator here. And arms. Money for arms. Money, arms, and oil. Okay? M-A-O. Money, arms, and oil. Mao. Right there. The key to it all. And if we pull it away and we look at the original layout of cards, suddenly it makes a lot more sense. We have foolishness in the past. We have negotiations between two sides over the sanctions and over the militaristic stance and the arriving of the aircraft carrier battle group, and Russia defending Syria and willing to go into help Iran, and the sides are being drawn for warfare. So there are urgent negotiations going on. And out of these talks, out of these circumstances, out of the battlefield, when all hell breaks loose, somewhere along the line, a great leader is going to come forward who's going to say, look, it's not about Islam and Christianity. It's not about Judaism and Islam. It's about money. It's about money. It's about oil. You want the pipelines? We'll put the pipelines in. We just want to have our share of the money from those pipelines. And we might have peace for a while as the Iranians build up a stockpile of more arms and have more training time. They may be ready for a war now. But frankly, the only way Iran could win a war is if Russia sides with them 100%. And Russia, as I've said earlier, is going to get rich from these sanctions because oil prices are going to go up. That might be why OPEC's considering limiting oil production with Iran out of the equation to help prop up Libya and Venezuela and to bolster the Russian economy so they don't side with Iran. But through this all, some kind of leader is going to show up, and it's not a religious leader. This is not a religious leader. It may be someone who has religion at their heart. As you can see a cross here, which is really interesting because this is an Islamic deck. I mean, who knows, it could be a Chaldean who are a Christian enclave in that region. But it looks to me that this is going to be a leader who's a governmental economic leader. And, you know, they may impose another Shah. At this point in time, I'd like to leave it open, and I'd like to also leave open the idea that it's just basically going to be a sinking hole of endless hellishness that never gets resolved. Even if they say, go ahead and put in the pipeline gets bombed. And even if they say, go ahead and put in the Shah gets executed. And even if they go ahead and create a world war, the world war spreads over 3 continents. And even if they say, we won't have a war, we'll defend Iran's rights to do whatever they want, Iran will just develop a nuclear bomb and drop it. This king of mandalas means no matter which way you go, it's going to be a sinking hole. There is no way out. This is going to be an ugly, long, bitter debacle. And that's the best way to describe it. So hopefully next time we do Iran, the cards will change, the future will change, and we'll see something a little more cheery and happy. But for now, thank you for watching, and I really appreciate your patronage here on Patreon, and I hope to deliver more videos as time continues. Thank you so much for watching.